Holland's trip to San Francisco, using the opportunity to unveil some new measures to encourage startups here in France.
Yeah, as you were saying, he met with those groups of business leaders in France, many of them working in the tech startup sector, having moved from France to California because they feel it's easier to succeed there. So François Hollande used the opportunity to unveil his plan to encourage entrepreneurship in France and to try to stop the sort of brain drain that's seen those people go to the United States in the past. Now, these measures will include a push for greater use of crowdfunding, a popular method of financing new ventures in other countries. François Hollande says that he can do more to push that in France. He also wants companies to make future job offers to students to give them sort of job security for the future so they can develop their own ideas in the meantime and set up their own companies. He also floated this idea of talent passports, making it easier for foreign entrepreneurs to come to France. He envisages 5,000 to 10,000 of them could come to France every year, making the visa process more easily to encourage that sort of entrepreneurship, startups in France, which of course will create jobs.
More French business. It's a new ruling that affects the thorny issue here of Sunday opening for shops.
Yeah, under French law, shops can only open on Sundays under very strict conditions. Only certain sectors and certain areas are allowed to trade on a Sunday. Last December, the government issued an executive order adding hardware stores to the list of exceptions after a campaign by workers and bosses to be allowed open their doors on a Sunday. It was a temporary measure supposed to be limited until July of next year, until a new law was drafted for this particularly controversial sector. But France's Council of State said that order wasn't legal and that they've struck it down in the interim measure. That means those shops will have to close their doors this Sunday. Unions have welcomed the decision, but businesses say that it could be damaging.
We were completely stunned by what's been decided. Employees of Bricorama have been fighting for months to get a measure of fairness over working on Sundays. The government started out on a constructive process, but now we're back starting from zero.
Let's take a look at what's happening on the markets now. And first to Wall Street, which closed almost flat in trading on Wednesday. That's despite the news the Senate passed an increase to the government's borrowing limit, which came just before the close. You can see fairly little movement across the markets there, just the Nasdaq in the green. Investors keenly awaiting figures on retail sales and jobless claims due to come out of the United States later. Meanwhile, in Asia, the Nikkei in Tokyo is down almost 1%, just over 1% actually, due to the rising value of the yen. A generally negative picture across the Asian markets, though, as investors take profits after gains in recent days. Just Shanghai nudging slightly into the green. In Sydney, just checking in on the S&P ASX 200, that's, as you can see, just slightly in the green there. Bad news out of Australia today. Surprising, in fact, that unemployment has hit a 10-year high of just 6%, but it really is a sign of things changing in the Australian labour market. The second month we've seen the number of people out of work there increase.
Companies news next. News of a deal to sell the American firm Time Warner.
Yeah, the cable company Comcast has agreed a deal to buy its rival Time Warner Cable for $45 billion worth of shares. Sources close to the company say the deal has been finalised at a price 17% above Time Warner's closing share price yesterday. It trumps a previous offer from Charter to Communications to buy the business for $38 billion.
We're going to take you now to a country we don't mention very often in the business news. Perhaps we should. Bosnia, the protests we've seen in recent days.
Yeah, the demonstrations have focused on this failure of the country's attempt at privatisation. It's part of a legacy of dismantling communism in the country 20 years ago that left the majority of state industries transferred into private hands. Now, some 80% of those privatisations have failed, leaving people out of work and with no income. With unemployment touching 40% in some parts of Bosnia, these companies have become a target for protesters. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has the story.
Once a bustling workplace, this factory's now silent and empty. It's just one of the former state-owned companies that's languished under private ownership. This detergent factory used to be the market leader. Just a few years later, its employees stopped receiving their salaries and production ground to a halt.
Imagine you have something secure and concrete, and then suddenly you don't have it anymore. They ripped off Dita and its workers overnight. They stole from us. But we're now guarding the factory. Thank God for that.
A long-term industrial slowdown that's feeding frustration here in Bosnia. Tensions have now reached boiling point, with unemployment at over 40%, a widening gap between rich and poor, and widespread corruption fueling much of the dissent. Demonstrations are going strong across the country as Bosnian protesters call for the government to step down.
Peaceful demonstrations are being held around Bosnia, and politicians have a lot to lose now that the people have finally decided to speak up.
Protesters are demanding snap elections, yet the establishment of a new political order is unlikely to address their political and economic concerns. Since the end of the war in 1995, power must be shared between three major groups: Serbs, Croats and Muslims, which can make reaching a consensus on key issues almost impossible.
Now, Lou, and if I can get my words out, a record-breaking year, that's what I'm trying to say, for art sales. 2013 wasn't it?
Yeah, we had all this news, of course, during the year of these individual art pieces selling for massive amounts of money. Francis Bacon's triptych coming to mind. The French firm Art Price, though, has estimated that the art market globally grew by 13% last year, making it the biggest ever year for art sales. It says 12 billion euros worth of art was sold at public auction last year, up from 8.8 billion in 2012. So really a huge increase in the spend. The biggest spenders were in China. They spent over $4 billion on art last year, up 20% on 2012. Very closely followed by the United States, then much lower down the rankings, the UK, which is just over 2 billion, France, and then Germany. But really, it seems like people are willing to invest in art, despite the fact they might be short of cash in other areas.
12 billion, it's a lot of dough, isn't it, Stephen
Yeah,
Carroll?
no art for you or me, I think.
No, I don't think so, yeah, perhaps not. Maybe a little postcard that we bought on the beach somewhere, that's about it.